You're getting exactly what you deserve. Nothing, my sister sneered, shoving the settlement across the table. Dad knew you were a failure. I sat calmly. She knew nothing about the safe. I'm Paige and I'm 33 years old. I work as a middle school art teacher. For my whole life, I've been the quiet and steady one in the background. I make a modest living, but I truly love my life and my students. I never needed luxury to feel complete. My sister was always the favored one. She was loud, flashy, and completely obsessed with appearances and money. She needed everyone to know how important she was. She wore designer clothes and drove expensive cars. My parents always praised her ambition, while they smiled politely at my art projects. That dynamic defined our relationship for decades. I accepted my place in the family without much complaint. I wasn't rich or glamorous. I didn't have a high-powered career or a fancy title to throw around at dinner parties. But I had something they didn't expect at all. I had our father's actual trust. He saw through the flashy exterior of my sister and knew exactly who I was. If you've ever felt underestimated because of where you started, hit that subscribe button. Do you know what it feels like to have potential no one sees yet? I want to hear your story in the comments. Click hype if you're ready to prove them wrong together. Let's go. The immediate aftermath of Dad passing away was a blur of grief and forced family gatherings. The smell of stale coffee and wilting lilies hung heavily in my childhood home. We gathered in the living room to discuss the estate. I was just trying to hold myself together. My sister suddenly produced a sketchy, recently dated document from her designer bag. She slammed it onto the glass coffee table. She claimed Dad left the entire $500,000 estate to her so she could manage it properly. I stared at the paper in disbelief. The signature looked rushed and wrong. "Let's be real, Paige," she said with a harsh laugh. "You'd blow this on art supplies. I'm just protecting the family legacy." Her words stung like a physical slap. I felt a tight knot form in my chest. She didn't even give me a chance to process the loss of our father before making her move. The shocking twist came moments later. She immediately locked me out of the family home. She actually changed the deadbolts while I was out getting groceries for the wake. When I returned, she handed me a small cardboard box filled with old photographs and cheap trinkets on the front porch. She called it sentimental junk. She claimed the rest of the assets for herself. The sound of the heavy wooden door slamming in my face echoed in my ears. I stood on the porch holding my small box of memories. The cold wind bit through my thin coat. I felt completely abandoned and humiliated by the one person who was supposed to share my grief. The sister I grew up with had transformed into a stranger, driven entirely by greed. I walked away from the house in a daze. I didn't argue or scream. I just let the silence settle over me while I processed the magnitude of her betrayal. I knew crying wouldn't fix this. The betrayals escalated quickly after that terrible afternoon. My sister wasted no time tapping into the estate funds. Just 2 weeks later, she pulled up to Dad's memorial service in a brand new luxury SUV. The shiny black paint reflected the gloomy sky. I asked her if she could help cover the remaining costs of the funeral arrangements. She coldly told me she wouldn't spare a single dime for such a pathetic service. I had to drain my own small savings account just to give our father a proper goodbye. She stood at the edge of the cemetery in her expensive sunglasses, acting like she was doing us a favor by simply showing up. The second betrayal happened at the family gathering following the burial. The rented hall smelled of cheap catering and damp wool coats. My sister stood near the buffet line, loudly holding court with our aunts and uncles. I walked past just in time to hear her making cruel jokes about my life choices. "Paige is completely financially illiterate," she announced to the room. "Thank God Dad had the sense to leave the real money to someone who actually understands wealth." My relatives chuckled and nodded in agreement. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. She was actively turning our extended family against me, painting me as a helpless child who needed to be protected from her own incompetence. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. I kept my mouth shut and quietly left the room. The third and final manipulation was the most aggressive. A heavy, official envelope arrived in my mailbox a week later. It was a formal mediation notice from her high-priced legal team. She included a deeply insulting $5,000 go-away offer. The letter came with a threatening voicemail. She promised to bleed the entire estate dry in legal fees if I dared to fight her in court. She wanted to crush my spirit completely. I endured the emotional damage day after day. The grief of losing my father was heavy, but the sting of my sister's cruelty was sharper. However, my sadness slowly started to harden into something else. I began to channel my grief into quiet resilience. I stopped crying. I stopped feeling sorry for myself. I realized she expected me to roll over and disappear. She expected me to take the scraps and say thank you. I froze. They had done it again. But this time, I wasn't going to play the role of the quiet victim. The entire family mistook my silence for weakness. They thought my lack of reaction meant I had accepted defeat. They assumed I was just a naive art teacher who lacked the spine to defend herself. But I wasn't panicking at all. My quiet demeanor wasn't surrender. It was preparation. Before Dad got really sick, he called me over one rainy Tuesday evening. The sound of the rain tapping against the window was the only thing louder than his ragged breathing. He handed me a folded slip of paper with a sequence of numbers. He told me to keep it safe and never tell anyone. What my sister didn't know was that I had already visited Dad's old workshop behind the garage. The smell of sawdust and motor oil was still fresh in the air. I found the heavy metal floor safe hidden beneath his sturdy wooden workbench. I entered the numbers. The heavy lock clicked open. I reached inside and pulled out a stack of manila envelopes. I already held the very thing that was going to destroy her completely. The contents of that safe were more valuable than she could ever comprehend. I had the truth. I needed someone who understood the legal weight of what I had found. I called Mr. Vance. He was Dad's original attorney and an old family friend. Mr. Vance was a sharp, calculating man who knew all the family's dirty secrets. He operated out of a small, wood-paneled office that always smelled faintly of peppermint and old paper. We held a secret meeting late on a Friday afternoon. I slid the manila envelopes across his massive oak desk. We carefully reviewed the damning evidence I pulled from the floor safe. It contained Dad's genuine, finalized trust, legally notarized just weeks before his death. But more importantly, it contained detailed bank ledgers. These ledgers proved my sister had been quietly embezzling Dad's money for 5 years. She had been siphoning funds into her own private accounts while pretending to manage his medical bills. Mr. Vance looked at the documents, adjusted his glasses, and gave me a grim smile. He knew exactly what to do. The day of the mediation finally arrived. The tension in the air was thick. I sat at the long conference table, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The heavy double doors swung open. My sister strutted into the room. She looked overly confident, wearing a tailored designer suit. She was flanked by a flashy, aggressive legal team who looked ready to tear me apart. She took her seat across from me with a smug, triumphant smirk on her face. Her arrogance was piquing. She assumed she had completely backed me into a corner. She thought this meeting was just a formality before she walked away with everything. She didn't even look at Mr. Vance, assuming he was just a relic from the past. She had no idea the trap was already sprung. The mediation room at the downtown legal center was cold and incredibly tense. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. My sister wasted no time. She tossed a pen onto the polished mahogany table. It clattered loudly in the quiet room. "Sign it, Paige," she demanded, aggressively leaning over the table. "Take the 5,000. You don't have a dime to fight me, and we both know it." Her flashy lawyer began to rattle off a list of legal threats, detailing how they would drag this out for years if I refused. I didn't blink. I didn't reach for the pen. I just looked directly into my sister's eyes. I felt absolutely cold and completely in control. Mr. Vance stepped forward, smoothly interrupting her loud attorney. He placed his worn leather briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. He calmly unlocked the brass latches. The sharp clicks echoed in the silent room. He slowly pulled out the contents of the hidden safe. "My client won't be signing anything today," Mr. Vance stated in a firm, unwavering voice. He dropped the real, legally binding trust on the center of the table. Then, he slammed down the thick stack of bank logs. "We are here to discuss the recovery of stolen assets," Mr. Vance continued. "These documents prove your client has committed felony embezzlement against the estate for the past 5 years." The reaction was immediate and spectacular. My sister reached for the papers, her smug expression vanishing instantly. All the color drained from her face. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Her flashy lawyer snatched the bank logs first. His eyes darted rapidly across the pages. He realized in seconds that the dates, the signatures, and the transfer records were undeniable. He realized he had been used to commit a massive fraud. He shoved the papers back toward my sister. Without saying a single word to her, he hurriedly packed his own briefcase. He stood up, apologized to Mr. Vance, and practically ran out of the room. He abandoned her right then and there. My sister was left sitting alone. She was stuttering, completely exposed, and entirely powerless. The empire she tried to steal had just crushed her. The aftermath was swift and brutal. I legally took my rightful place as the sole executor of the estate. I secured the full $500,000 inheritance exactly as Dad truly intended. The money went into a secure account, safe from anyone's greed. My sister's life unraveled spectacularly. She is now left facing a massive criminal investigation for fraud and elder financial abuse. The expensive cars and designer clothes cannot save her from the legal nightmare she created. The aunts and uncles who once praised her at the memorial service have totally ostracized her. No one in the extended family will return her desperate phone calls. She lost the money, she lost her reputation, and she lost her family. I walked out of that legal center feeling lighter than I had in months. The quiet art teacher had finally spoken up. They thought money made them untouchable. But the truth is, greed always leaves a paper trail. You just have to know where to look. If your family ever took advantage of you financially, you know exactly how heavy that betrayal feels. Subscribe to join a community of people who refuse to be victims. Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Click hype to help this story reach others who have been there. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and click hype to help it reach more people who need to hear it. Your voice matters in our community. Share your own experience in the comments below. I'm reading.